It started with a knock on the door and the sound of my grandmother crying. She was sitting on the floor, clutching a crumpled photograph in one hand, her wedding ring in the other. Her purse had been emptied. Her bank account? Cleared out. The last thing she said before breaking down completely was, "He was supposed to come today." But there was no he. Just silence. And the soft rustle of a funeral brochure that had fallen to the floor, still open to a prepaid plan she couldn't afford. Elsewhere, 2,000 miles away, a man stared at his screen in silence. Dozens of messages sent. Dozens of women, like my grandmother, tricked. But this time, something cracked. This time, he saw her face. And he cried. Not because he got caught. Not because he felt sorry for the money. But because, for a split second, he saw the truth of what he'd done. The loneliness in her eyes. The empty chair beside her. The man she lost and the hope she thought she'd found again in him. This wasn't just a scam. It was a carefully crafted lie told over months. And for Maggie Lewis, 72 years old and freshly widowed, it wasn't just money that was stolen. It was trust. It was the last bit of light she had after burying the love of her life. How does someone fall in love with a ghost? And what happens when that ghost speaks back? This is the story of how one online romance turned into a nightmare and how the man behind it never expected to feel anything at all. Until he did. What did he see in her face that made him break down? And why, even after all the lies, did she still say his name? It all began with one message and it hasn't ended yet. Before the messages, before the betrayal, before everything fell apart, there was just Maggie. Margaret Lewis, everyone called her Maggie, was the kind of woman who still wrote thank you notes by hand and always remembered your birthday, even if you forgot hers. She was 72 years old, quiet, kind, and lived in a cozy two-bedroom home on the edge of town where the mail still got dropped at the front door, and the neighbors actually waved hello. Her husband, Jack, had been gone for just over a year. They were married for 48 of those years. High school sweethearts. A lifetime of shared dinners, family road trips, and inside jokes no one else understood. When Jack died, it was like the color drained from Maggie's world. Her days blurred into one another. Breakfast alone. Television humming in the background. The occasional phone call from her granddaughter Claire, but mostly silence. She wasn't bitter. Not angry at the world. Just quiet. There's a certain loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from feeling like the best part of your life is already over. Maggie still kept Jack's slippers under the bed. His favorite mug on the shelf. His old flannel shirts hanging in the closet, untouched. Claire, her 27-year-old granddaughter, checked in often. She loved her grandma more than anything, but life was busy. New job, new apartment, and a relationship that wasn't going anywhere but felt too hard to leave. Still, she made time. Weekly calls, occasional visits. But Maggie didn't want to worry her. She always said, "I'm fine, sweetie. Don't fuss." And then came the day Maggie joined a Facebook group for widows. It seemed harmless. A digital community of women sharing their stories of grief, strength, and hope. Maggie scrolled through posts late at night, reading about women who had learned to laugh again, to travel again, even to love again. And for the first time in months, she felt something spark inside her. A maybe. A what if. That's when she saw the comment. A kind message from someone named David Carter. He said he'd lost his wife too. That he admired how Maggie wrote about Jack, that kind of love, he said, was rare. He didn't push. Just offered comfort. A gentle voice in a storm she thought she was weathering alone. They started talking. First in the comments, then through private messages. Maggie found herself smiling again. Laughing. Checking her phone in the morning like a teenager with a crush. David told her he was a retired engineer. That he lived on the coast. That he had 2 grandchildren and liked jazz and gardening and watching old movies, just like her. He called her Mags. And she liked it. Every message made her feel seen. Heard. Not like an old woman living alone, but like someone who still mattered. Someone who could be loved again. Claire noticed a change. During their calls, Maggie seemed lighter. Happier. She brushed it off as just keeping busy, but Claire sensed something. Still, she didn't push. If her grandma had found a little spark again, wasn't that a good thing? No one knew who David really was. Not yet. To Maggie, he was kind. Patient. A good man who'd also lost the love of his life and found solace in the same grief. To David, Maggie was a target. But in those first few weeks, before the requests, before the red flags, before the warnings she didn't want to hear, there was only connection. Hope. The kind that sneaks in quietly and tells you maybe, just maybe, it's not too late to feel something real again. That's how the story begins. With two people typing words across a digital distance. One looking for healing. The other looking for opportunity. And the most tragic part? Maggie had no idea she was already falling. It started small. A good morning message. A heart emoji after something sweet. A thinking of you before bedtime. And to Maggie, it felt like warmth returning to a house that had long gone cold. David had a calm, respectful way of speaking. He never rushed. Never pressured. Just listened. He remembered things, Jack's favorite jazz song, Maggie's love of begonias, how she always baked too many cookies at Christmas and gave them to the neighbors. He told her he admired her strength. That it inspired him. That after losing his wife, he never thought he'd smile again until Maggie. They talked every day. Sometimes about nothing, what they had for lunch, the weather, old movies they both liked. Sometimes about everything. Late-night messages turned into long phone calls. Maggie would sit by the window with her tea, smiling as David's voice filled the room. He spoke with a soft accent she couldn't quite place, somewhere between North Carolina and nowhere in particular. He told her he'd retired after working as an engineer overseas. That he'd lost his wife to cancer 4 years ago. That he was raising 2 grandkids, Liam and Sarah, after his daughter passed in a car crash. Maggie listened with her whole heart. He sent photos. A blurry picture of him in a garden, a few of the kids playing by a lake, even one of his dog, Charlie. And when Maggie shared her own pictures of her in Jack at Niagara Falls, of Claire as a baby, David responded like someone who truly cared. She hadn't felt this scene in years. He made her laugh. Genuinely laugh. And not the polite, distant kind of laughter people give older women out of habit, but the kind that made her cheeks flush and her stomach ache. One day, David called her beautiful. Not for your age. Not, you still look great. Just, beautiful. Maggie blushed. She hadn't felt that in so long. She told Claire she'd reconnected with someone. An old friend from the internet, she said vaguely. She wasn't ready to explain. Not yet. David made her feel 25 again. Like the woman she was before arthritis, before grief, before quiet dinners and echoing rooms. One day, she asked, half joking, "Are you too good to be true?" And David replied, "I hope I'm exactly as good as you deserve." That night, Maggie cried. Not because she was sad. But because she wasn't sure if she'd ever believed someone truly meant something like that. As the weeks passed, David became a routine. A ritual. She started planning her days around their talks. She stopped watching TV, stopped reading the newspaper. Why bother, when someone was waiting just for her on the other side of the screen? He called her his light. He said her messages kept him going. And the strange thing was, she believed it. He never asked for anything. Not yet. That was the trick. He let time do the work. Let familiarity grow roots. Every message deepened the bond. Every call pulled her closer. One night, she told him something she hadn't even told Claire. How, sometimes, when the house is too quiet and the world feels too big, she puts on Jack's old cologne and sits in his chair, just to feel like he's still there. David didn't laugh. He didn't pity her. He said, "I talk to my wife every night before bed."
Still, we all need something to hold on to.
Maggie felt understood in a way no one had reached her in years.
This wasn't just casual conversation anymore. It was comfort. Companionship. Maybe even the beginning of something more.
She started sleeping better.
Smiling more. Baking again.
She even brought out Jack's old camera, took pictures of her garden to send to David. And when Claire asked what had her so cheerful, Maggie just shrugged and said, "Maybe I'm learning how to be happy again." It all felt so innocent.
So gentle. So real.
But that's how it works.
Romance scammers don't rush. They wait. They listen. They learn your heart before they ask for your wallet. And Maggie? She wasn't foolish. She wasn't careless. She was lonely. And human. And when someone finally saw her not as an old woman, but as a person full of stories, of tenderness, of love to give, how could she not trust him? How could she not believe, just for a little while, that she might not have to grow old alone? She didn't see the trap being set. She only saw the light it was wrapped in. And by the time she realized it was flickering, she was already in the dark. The first time he mentioned money, it didn't sound like a request. It was just a story. David said he was traveling for a short consulting job, something temporary, just to help cover the kids' school expenses. Maggie listened with interest, even pride. She told him how admirable it was, stepping up for his family like that. Then he casually mentioned a problem. A banking issue overseas. Something about a blocked wire transfer and a delayed payment from a client. Nothing serious, he said. Just frustrating. He added a little joke about how technology was supposed to make life easier, but never did. Maggie empathized. She knew the feeling. Late pension checks, surprise utility bills, it was life. She didn't offer anything. And he didn't ask. Not yet. But a few days later, David sounded more stressed than usual. He apologized for being distant, said he'd been trying to sort out this bank mess for days. His voice cracked slightly as he said, "I just hate feeling helpless, you know? Especially with the kids depending on me." That's when Maggie offered. Just a small loan, she said. Just enough to help him cover things until his payment came through. $200. Nothing life-changing. A gesture. David refused at first. But not forcefully. He said, "I could never accept that from you, Mags." She insisted. She wanted to help. And so he accepted, with hesitation that made it feel even more real. He thanked her endlessly. Called her his angel. Said she had a heart bigger than anyone he'd ever met. It felt good to be needed. But it didn't stop there. A week later, he said the funds still hadn't cleared. There was a sudden hospital expense. His grandson Liam had fallen while playing and needed x-rays. He didn't ask. He just told her the story. Voice trembling. Stress in every word. Maggie's heart ached. So she sent more. This time, $500. And again, endless gratitude. Long phone calls. A message the next morning with a photo of Liam's bandaged wrist and a thank you. "Couldn't have done this without you." It made her feel alive. Connected. Like she was part of something again. Claire began to notice changes. Maggie was more secretive about her phone. She'd pause calls to respond to texts. Her mood would swing between light and anxious. And when Claire asked if everything was okay, Maggie would smile too quickly and change the subject. She told herself it was fine. She told herself David would pay her back. And he promised he would. He even sent a screenshot of a bank transaction pending to her account. But days passed. Then weeks. The amounts grew. David said his travel had been extended. That he needed to secure a new visa. That legal fees had come up. It was always something. Maggie began dipping into her savings. Just a little at first. Then more.
Her grocery budget shrank. She postponed a minor surgery she'd been planning. Sold a small antique from her collection. But she didn't tell anyone. Because it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about not wanting to believe she'd been wrong. About protecting the story she had come to rely on and the voice on the other end of the phone, the good morning messages, the feeling that she was still worth loving. David kept the romance alive. He sent love notes. Called her his forever. Said once things settled, he wanted to fly out and meet her. Take her to the coast. Show her the places he always dreamed of sharing with someone who truly understood him. He painted futures. And Maggie believed in every brushstroke. Because when you're lonely, when your heart is still half broken and someone offers you the illusion of wholeness, you hold on tighter. Even if, deep down, something feels off. Even if the voice inside starts whispering questions. She just wasn't ready to listen. Not yet. Because love, real or not, can be louder than logic. And David knew exactly how loud to speak. At first, Maggie told herself she was just busy. That's why she skipped her weekly coffee with the neighbors. That's why she turned down Claire's invitation to Sunday brunch. She wasn't avoiding anyone. She was just focused. David needed her. And for the first time in a long time, someone needed her. Their conversations had gone from sweet and casual to urgent and constant. Morning messages turned into long midday chats, followed by late-night calls where David would speak in hushed tones about stress, loneliness, and the weight of raising 2 kids alone. He told her she was the only person he could truly talk to. He called her his peace. And slowly, without even noticing, Maggie's world began to shrink. She stopped watching her favorite programs. Her daily walks got shorter. She left groceries unpacked to answer his calls. Her phone was always in her hand, always at the ready. Just in case he needed her. Because if she didn't respond quickly, David would grow quiet. Distant. Sometimes, he'd say things like, "I just needed you today, Mags. But I guess you're busy." Or worse, "I knew I wasn't a priority in your life." And Maggie, who once prided herself on being thoughtful, would feel a deep, almost childlike guilt. She'd respond immediately. Apologize. Reassure. He never yelled. Never threatened. But every word carried weight. Subtle. Heavy. Deliberate. One afternoon, Claire dropped by unexpectedly. She noticed Maggie was more frazzled than usual. Distracted. The television was on but muted. Lunch sat cold on the table. Claire picked up the stack of envelopes by the door and noticed something strange: overdue bills. Maggie had always been organized, meticulous. When Claire asked gently if everything was all right, Maggie gave a tired smile and said, "Just behind on a few things. Nothing to worry about." But Claire did worry. She offered to help with errands or go over finances, but Maggie declined. Said she had it under control. That night, Maggie told David about Claire's visit. He didn't get angry. He got careful. He told her she needed to be cautious. That people will try to sabotage what we have because they don't understand it. He said he'd seen it before: family stepping in when they think they know what's best. Maggie felt torn. Claire had always been protective. But David made her feel heard. Important. Loved. And so, she pulled back even more. She stopped answering Claire's calls right away. Took longer to reply to texts. And in the silence, David's voice grew louder. More frequent. More intense. He'd started calling her before bed just to say he couldn't sleep without hearing her voice. He even said, "I don't know what I'd do if I ever lost you." It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about identity. Maggie, the widow, was now Maggie, the partner. The confidant. The one holding someone else together. And that kind of role is hard to give up. So when her checking account got low, she didn't tell anyone. When she sold a few antique dishes online, she didn't tell Claire. When she skipped her dental appointment to wire David another $300, she told herself it was just temporary.
Just until he sorted things out. But nothing ever sorted out.
Every time he said almost there, another problem appeared. And every time Maggie questioned it even slightly, David grew distant. He'd send shorter messages.
Take longer to reply. Use silence as a wall.
Until she caved. Until she apologized.
Until she sent more.
Her world had become small.
Just her and a glowing screen.
And the hope that what they had was real.
She wasn't being scammed. She was needed. And for someone who'd spent a year being invisible, that was everything. That was enough to block out the doubt. Enough to isolate herself. Enough to give until there was almost nothing left.
Except his voice in her ear.
And the silence that came when it disappeared. It happened on a Tuesday. Maggie had been counting down the days. David said he was finally coming to see her. He'd booked a flight, told her what shirt he'd be wearing, blue plaid, just like Jack used to wear, and even described the flowers he wanted to bring. Lilies. Her favorite. She cleaned the house twice. Baked a pie. Laid out the nice teacups. And then, nothing. No call. No message. No arrival.
The airport drop-off time passed. Then the flight landing time.
Hours dragged on, and Maggie kept checking her phone. Refreshing. Praying. Making excuses. Maybe his phone died. Maybe there was a delay. By the next morning, she knew. He was gone. Blocked. Every message thread disappeared.
His Facebook profile vanished. His phone number rang once and went straight to voicemail, then stopped ringing altogether.
Panic turned to confusion. Confusion into dread.
She reached out to the bank to check the transfer he said was on its way. The teller gently told her the wire was fake, no funds were ever pending.
It hit her in waves. The fake photos. The fake stories.
The hours of her life spent falling in love with someone who never existed.
And the money. Gone. $12,680. Her savings. Her emergency fund.
The small nest egg she and Jack had built.
She couldn't breathe.
She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the picture of Jack, her fingers trembling. How could she have fallen for it? She'd always been careful. Always warned Claire about scams. And yet here she was, caught in one so deeply, so emotionally, it felt less like theft and more like a kind of emotional erasure. Every message replayed in her mind.
Every I love you. Every promise. Lies. The pie sat untouched. The flowers she'd bought for the entryway wilted overnight. And Maggie. Maggie didn't cry right away.
She sat in silence for nearly 2 days.
Shame doesn't always show up with tears. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it just steals your voice.
When Claire found her, the house was dark.
The phone was off. The bank statement lay open on the counter.
And next to it, a printed photo of David, the only one she ever had.
Maggie looked up at Claire with hollow eyes and whispered. He was never coming, was he? And in that moment, the betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about trust. Hope. The feeling that someone finally saw her ripped away. And the worst part?
She still wanted to believe he cared.
Even now. Claire didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't have to.
She sat beside her grandmother on the couch, holding her hand as Maggie stared blankly at the floor. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the old wall clock Jack used to wind every Sunday.
Maggie finally whispered, almost ashamed.
"I didn't want to believe it wasn't real." Claire squeezed her hand. Then came the part no one ever prepares you for: filing a police report.
Detective Ramos was kind. Gentle, even.
He'd seen this before, too many times. He explained that David Carter wasn't a real person. The man behind the profile was part of a larger network.
International. Professional. Ruthless. He'd used stolen photos. Scripted stories. Fake addresses. Everything was fake. But Maggie's heartbreak? Very real. Ramos showed them documents. Screenshots. Even other victim reports. Messages that looked almost identical to the ones Maggie had received. Same compliments. Same promises. Same lies. It wasn't love. It was a pattern. And Maggie had been one more dot in that pattern. That was the hardest part. Not just realizing she'd been scammed, but realizing she wasn't special to him at all. She was a target. Her kindness had been used against her. Her grief weaponized. For days after the visit, Maggie barely spoke. She moved through her house like a ghost, stopping to stare at things she used to love. The garden. The wedding photos. Jack's favorite records. All of it now surrounded by this new, invisible shadow. Guilt. Not for losing the money, though that stung, but for not seeing it. For not listening to her gut. For shutting out the people who loved her. For believing in someone who never even existed. And the question that haunted her the most. What if Claire hadn't come over when she did? How much further would she have gone? How much more would she have given? Maggie wasn't just angry at him. She was angry at herself. And that is a pain no one talks about. The way shame lingers in the corners of the room. The way it rewrites memories. Every message from David, now poison. Every sweet word, now a red flag she missed. But in the middle of all that pain, something else quietly returned. Claire. This time, she didn't just check in. She stayed. She helped sort through the bank records. Sat with her grandma at the kitchen table. Cooked dinner. Laughed at old family stories just to fill the silence. And slowly, Maggie began to look up again. Still broken. But not alone. Healing didn't come all at once. There was no dramatic turning point, no magical moment where Maggie woke up and everything felt better. It started in small, quiet ways. Like opening the curtains again. Watering the plants she had nearly let die. Playing Jack's favorite records, not because she missed him, but because she wanted to feel something again. Claire stayed longer than planned. She worked remotely from Maggie's house, filled the kitchen with the smell of coffee and fresh bread, and reminded her, gently, that life hadn't stopped. It had just paused. One afternoon, while organizing papers in a shoebox, Claire found something unexpected, a handwritten list Maggie had made months before. Things to do before 75. At the top of the list, Maggie had written, "Feel useful again." Claire didn't say anything at the time. She just smiled, tucked the note into her own journal, and had an idea. The next week, they visited a local senior center. Maggie hadn't wanted to go at first. She felt embarrassed. Exposed. Like everyone would see her and know. But they didn't. They saw a kind woman who still had so much to offer. And soon, Maggie found herself volunteering a few hours each week, helping other seniors navigate the internet, set up passwords, avoid phishing emails. She told her story quietly, carefully. Not for sympathy. But because someone needed to hear it. And every time she did, someone nodded with that same quiet shame in their eyes. Maggie realized she wasn't the only one. She never had been. That realization, being part of something again, something bigger than her grief, was the first real piece of herself she got back. She even found herself laughing again. Not the polite kind. The real kind. The kind that shook her shoulders and made Claire smile from across the room. She started baking again. Shared her cookies with the neighbors. Sat on the porch with her knitting and watched the sunset like she used to. The pain was still there. But so was the strength. And one day, Maggie looked in the mirror, gently touched her chest, and said aloud to herself, "You were never stupid. You were just hopeful. There's a difference. She wasn't healed. But she was rebuilding. Piece by piece. And this time, the love she gave was going where it was deserved. Back to herself. And to the people who had never left. If it could happen to Maggie, it could happen to your mother. Your grandmother. Your neighbor down the street. It could happen to you. Romance scams aren't about foolishness. They're about loneliness. About grief. About the human need to feel seen, especially after loss. Maggie wasn't naive. She was smart. She was thoughtful. She was someone who gave love because she believed in it. And that's what these scammers prey on. Not your money, but your heart. They're patient. They're calculated. They know what to say, how to listen, and exactly when to twist trust into control. And by the time you realize it, it's not just your bank account that's empty. It's your sense of self. But here's what Maggie wants you to know. You are not alone. You are not broken. And this is not the end of your story. She found her way back. Through connection. Through support. Through honesty. And now she's helping others find their way too. So if you know someone who seems withdrawn, who's suddenly secretive, who's always on their phone with someone new, check in. Ask questions. Be gentle. But don't stay silent. Because silence is the scammer's best friend. And if you've gone through something like this, there's help. There's healing. And there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. We've included resources below. Hotlines. Fraud support groups. Educational links. Use them. Share them. Start a conversation. Because love should never leave you in ruins. And Maggie's story? It's not just a warning. It's a reminder. Even after the worst kind of betrayal, you are still worthy of trust, of kindness, of real love. Thank you for watching. Now, go protect someone you love.